Welcome to the Urban Renewal Agency Board meeting. Today is April 11th, 2023. It's noon and we're at the appointed place at the appointed time. So I'm calling this meeting to order. Are there any citizen comments? Okay. Corrections or additions to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the active agenda. Approval of the minutes February 14th, 2023 and March 21st, 2023. Are there any?
Madam Chairman, I read through those and I didn't find any errors. So he did a very good job.
Just a question, did you not do minutes last month then?
No, we had a posting of an agenda issue, so we ended up changing the meeting, so we had adequate posting, and then we did not approve it. We didn't do any active agenda items.
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, and there is, we have a second for the motion first? Okay, moving second, discussion. There is one typo in item 4 of the February 14th minutes, financial. Okay, so do you want to
Amend that?
Okay, and does the second want to?
Sure.
Okay, so it's been moved and second to approve the minutes with the noted change. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And I don't vote this meeting because until the city council approves reappointment,
Okay,
or not, I don't have a vote.
so you're running rogue
Not
today.
able to vote.
We're happy that you're here at the table with us. Thanks, Butch. Okay. Approval of the
Sure,
financial
Andy,
summary,
tonight.
February 23rd and March 23rd. February 23rd was in the board packet and March 23rd was passed out today. We've asked for these to be included. This is the first month that we've had them included so that we have the information when we're voting to spend the money. We at least know what we have.
And, Chair, if I may,
Yes, you may.
there is a notation at the bottom of the March one that does show that the URA is still committing the $552,000 to the city of Lewiston.
I so appreciate that. Because that will come out of the East Main.
And so you can see the little one superscript is here with those
Okay.
debt reserves.
Okay, okay, so this is the East Orchard Sewer Project then?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep,
all right, because we paid off East Main.
that is right.
Okay, so this is what we owe for the URA share of the East Orchard Sewer Project.
Correct.
Are there any other comments or questions on the financials statements? Does everybody see what we're talking about? This note at the very bottom of the March? It's, we're now keeping track of what we owe other people.
That's good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's always nice to know.
Yes, it is nice to know. All right. So is there a motion to approve the financial summaries?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
It's been moved in second to approve the financial summaries for February 23 and March 23. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of invoices. We have, we'll take them one at a time. Douglas Law, January 2023 for $425. And it should be in your packet.
I move we approve the payment to Douglas Law for $425.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, second invoice to Douglas Law for February 23 for $375.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, it's been, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. And finally, TPC Holdings Annual Report Publication. This is a requirement that we report it, that we publish it in the paper. The invoice is for $29 and included in your packet.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second?
And moved and second to approve that invoice. Any discussion? And we don't have an abstain this time around. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
My only question would be only $29?
I know, I thought that too.
Must have been a sale, Don.
You cutting your fees, are you?
I guess.
Don't look your gift horse in the mouth.
All right, moving on, we're to the approval of the amended bylaws that have not changed since we looked at them. Is that
That is
correct?
correct.
Okay. So we've looked at them 2 or 3 months in a row now, and I think we're finally ready to take an action on them. If there is a motion.
Make a motion to approve the bylaws of the Urban Renewal Agency.
Okay. Is there
Second that.
a second? Any more discussion on our bylaws? The resolution that we have in our packet does not require a change to the bylaws if we should drop that resolution, correct? Okay. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, our bylaws are been adopted. Okay, then finally, resolution 2023-01. And this is a resolution I requested. Do you want to speak to it, or do you want me to talk about it?
Either one?
Okay. I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. So this resolution just allows that the chairperson, the vice chairperson, chairperson signs the checks, vice chairperson in their absence, and then the director or assistant director in my absence will sign the checks to have 2 signatures still, one from board, one from staff.
Makes sense.
Like it?
Yes. Yes, we had that with Dan Marsh when he was an employee with the city. I bet he was also a board member. And then when he left the board, it's been 2 at-large members signing the checks. And if we're both gone, then the checks don't get signed. And so this just allows, we're pretty sure somebody from staff will be here. And hopefully one of us will be here. So,
So one of you 2 or one of your person.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Katie is the other one. So, and it puts 4 signatures on the bank account. So, you know, more people, more eyes looking at the bank account. It's just a good check and balance.
Oh, that's good policy.
Okay, so do we want a motion to read the resolution by title first and then a resolution to adopt it? How do we do that here?
Make a motion to read it.
Okay,
I'll make a motion to read it.
okay. Is there a second? Second? Okay. So, resolution number 2020, actually, I guess we have to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. A resolution of the City of Lewiston Urban Renewal Agency establishing parties authorized to endorse checks and drafts for the agency and providing an effective date. Whereas, in accordance with the Lewiston Urban Renewal Agency, hereafter agency bylaws, Article 7 provides for the agency to authorize agents to execute instruments and further provides for such authorized agents to sign checks, drafts, or other payments of monies as established by resolution of the agency. And whereas currently the agency requires all checks, drafts, payment of monies, contracts, and resolutions to be signed by the agency chairperson and vice chairperson, and whereas in order for the agency to continue business and process payments in a timely fashion, it is necessary to add additional parties as signatories on checks, drafts, or other payments of monies following prior approval of the agency board. Therefore, so be it resolved, all approved checks, drafts, payments of monies, contracts, and resolutions shall be signed by 2 individuals, the chairperson and the director. In the chairperson's absence, the vice chairperson shall sign, and in the director's absence, the assistant director shall sign. Okay, so now I'll entertain a motion to adopt.
I would move we adopt with the little change of adding vice in front of the Sheila Blunt chairperson.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're on to unfinished business, and I will turn that over to Shannon.
Okay, so today we have Megan Conrad from Elam and Burke. Megan, can you hear us? Yay. And we should have, okay, great. And we should have given you permission to share your screen. We do have copies of the PowerPoint that you sent here with us, and so people can follow along. So I didn't know if you wanted to share your screen or if you want just for us to follow along. It's up to you.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Great bet. Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. If it's okay with you, let's try and not have me share my screen and just have you follow along if that's okay. We'll just see how that works, and if it's not working, I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Okay. I had just a few quick preliminary comments. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. I apologize for the format. I really wish I could be up there with you in person. Sometimes these Zoom presentations are not quite all they're cracked up to be, so I hope I don't put you to sleep here from Boise. My intent, and I believe what my task here, is to provide just an updated Urban Renewal 101 that addresses both the existing statutes as well as peppers throughout a few best practices. These types of presentations I think are helpful almost to have on an annual basis, just to level set, and as new board members come on and those who have a long-standing experience being a board member, it just maintains some consistency over the years. Please feel free to ask me any questions as we navigate through these slides. There's a lot of information included in the slide deck. I definitely am not going to hit on every point. I know a lot of you have significant familiarity with urban renewal and the tool. And so really I'm hoping just to create a framework as well as some discussion around some emerging best practices, especially as you are tasked with implementing your urban renewal plans. Just a couple of additional points. The tool itself is ever evolving due to legislative changes. So I think all of us as practitioners, as commissioners, those that inform and or respond to agency action, it is important to keep on top of these statutory amendments. Likewise, I think it's really important to hear what legislators and community members are saying about the tool, and really hearing the concerns and perhaps even some of the criticism with the tool. Because taking that also does make it a better tool and a better process, and frankly, overall, just a better asset for each of these communities to implement the tool throughout the state. So I think as a foremost, and I think, Lewiston has been great about this, is always making sure we're taking actions transparently with an understanding of the statute and consistent with the language of your urban renewal plan, with this overlay of emerging best practices. Again, happy to answer any questions. I definitely am not here to necessarily opine on anything, but can provide perhaps some sideboards that may help navigate, developer funding requests or participation opportunities as they arise in your community. So, any questions with regards to just the preamble bit there? Okay, I will jump right in. So we'll jump to page 3 of your slides, which is entitled Urban Renewal Agency Authority. And I think when we talk about urban renewal, we really have to start at the beginning. So what is our statutory authority? And there are 2 sections of Idaho Code that address urban renewal. The first is the Urban Renewal Law of 1965, which is Chapter 20, Title 50. Those statutes really set forth the establishment of the agency, the powers of an urban renewal agency. But I think we have to keep in mind that this particular chapter was really adopted as almost the model. I think it pretty much came from the Model HUD Act in 1965. And there's been some tweaks here and there, but it largely remains the same. Then what we have is the Local Economic Development Act, which is Chapter 29, Title 50 Idaho Code. That came on in around 1988, and that is the financing arm of the tool. That is what gives us our revenue allocation authority, and provides the definitions for base and increment, and really sets up the program as to how we get the revenues allocated to the agency within a defined geographic area. We also need to keep top of mind the Idaho Constitution and some of the goals and the standards set forth therein, particularly this concept that when we are receiving an allocation of public funds, that we need to predominantly use those funds to support a public purpose. And so when we weigh requests for support, really looking first and foremost at, is this a public purpose? And sometimes those kinds of analysis are hard. You really have to kind of wade through the weeds. The other thing that we look at is in performing and informing the side boards is what case law is out there. Well, there's a that was in the 1960s referred to as YPONG, which stands for the proposition that urban renewal agencies are not subject to Article 8 and are able to enter into long-term debt without voter approval. That analysis, there had been some statutory changes, but that analysis was held up in Hart v. Rexburg. That was in around 2008, 2010. And that board composition was a mix of lay as well as elected officials, and ultimately the determination the court made was YPONG is still valid law, and an urban renewal agency is not subject to Article 8 and there may enter into long-term debt without voter approval. There have been some additional challenges. In around 2018, there was a challenge to 2 ordinances adopting urban renewal plans in Boise. The challenge there was whether or not, by the adoption of the ordinance itself, did that create an unconstitutional liability on behalf of the city under that would implicate or bring into discussion the Article 8, Section 3 of the Idaho Constitution. And the court ultimately found that the adoption of the ordinance in and of itself did not create an unconstitutional liability on behalf of the city. So, these cases do come up, and we do want to track them and track the language as we move forward, because a lot of the statutes, especially as you know, in chapters 20 and 29, provides a lot of parameters, but sometimes doesn't have a ton of specificity in there. When we talk about urban renewal boards, the model for a long time was either wholly elected, so your city council could sit as the board. There were other boards that were entirely lay member boards. And I think after there were some statutory changes in 2016, there was a clarification that you really cannot have more, not have a majority of your board be elected officials. So for example, on a 5-member board, you would not want 3 city council members sitting on that board. So you have to have less than a majority.
Megan, Commissioner Beck, Nez County. Question, is it ever the legality of spending taxpayers' dollars with non-elected officials, has that ever been challenged?
Well, in some respects, that was addressed a little bit in Hart v. Rexburg, because that was a mix of a lay and with the 2 elected officials on that body. And the holding of that case was, that they were able to enter into long-term debt without voter approval. which I think there is that implied authority. There are lots of appointed commissions that necessarily do spend the public funds. In terms of the specific case, with that specific issue, I'm not aware of that, but I do think that authority is implied in both the statute and the case law that's been approved.
Okay.
So the next slide digs in a little bit more to the Article 8, Section 4, and the limitations on the use of revenue allocation proceeds with regards to requiring that there be a predominantly public purpose, and that the public funds be expended for the benefit of the public. So when we talk about projects that potentially come before you, that is a critical analysis. There are some analyses that are easier than others. For example, it's pretty clear that, and this happens a lot in a number of agencies, the developer will come in and say, we have a great project, we're having a little trouble getting off the ground. Why don't you, urban renewal agency, fund the construction of the building for me? And then that means I will bring my business here and have 20 or 30 people with me as employees. That's a pretty bright line in terms of a hard no on how we would participate in a project. As a general rule, the public infrastructure, the below ground infrastructure in the right of way or in a public easement is generally okay. When you get into funding improvements inside of the development envelope, there does get to be more gray. And I think that's when we really have to start analyzing the question of who is benefiting more from those types of improvements. There are always exceptions to the rule and the circumstances that present themselves, so these analyses really have to be made on a case-by-case basis. But somewhat a good bright line rule is in the public right-of-way, in a public easement, yes. On asking or building a building for a private entity, and that includes a nonprofit. A nonprofit is a private entity. There is not a legal distinction that makes a nonprofit something different than a private entity. So I think when we start funding directly those types of improvements that just benefit a developer, that's where we really want to start having the conversation. So there's just a little bit more information on this between slides 4 through 7. And I believe you should have page numbers on the bottom right-hand corner of your slide. Let me know if you don't.
So Megan, can I ask a question? This is Joanne Cole-Hansen. I'm an at-large member. One of our revenue allocation areas encompasses an area around the hospital, which is now is a private entity. It's not a public, even if it was nonprofit, it would still be probably in the gray area. There's buildings around there, apartment buildings that are blighted and full of asbestos. One of the projects we talked about doing was demoing those. But that would clearly benefit development in the future. So that would be a gray area?
Yes, that's an excellent example of something that would be in the gray area. When we talk about and actually let's turn to slide 8 because this talks about what authorities the URA has. And, demolition of property is clearly an authority that an urban renewal agency has. If the agency owns the property, that is a no-brainer. The agency can clearly demolish the building that sits on an agency-owned property. And I think there's probably even more flexibility when you talk about property that's owned by other public entities. I think when we talk about actions or activities that we are taking on private property, we really have to consider what is the goal and is it consistent with our urban renewal plan, is it consistent with the statute? I do think one of the main benefits of the urban renewal tool is to remediate impediments to development and deteriorating conditions. And sometimes that means that perhaps partnering with a public entity may mean providing some dollars to remediate environmental conditions, such as asbestos, such as toxic materials in the ground, and or in coordination, even with working with DEQ sometimes when we need to bring in those types of agencies. I do think that is something that, you're really going to have to dig into on a case-by-case basis, but there are certainly examples, I think, for where it doesn't necessarily, it's been maybe a partnership in terms of the demolition, but with the focus really on assisting in the remediation of the environmental condition that's really causing the impediment that will not allow that property to redevelop on its own. So I think there is justification that remediating an environmental condition is really for the public benefit. But again, there's a lot of sort of facts that go into making those types of determinations, but does that help at all? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So on slide 8, we do just have a snapshot as to what are the powers of the urban renewal agency, and certainly you can see from this list, a lot of them are really focused on public infrastructure type improvements, such as constructing and reconstructing streets, facilities, parks, recreation facilities, public parking facilities. An agency does have the ability to acquire and dispose of property. And can you tell, I don't know, has the city of, or the Lewiston Urban Renewal Agency bought property? Have they engaged in that type of use of the tool?
No.
No? Okay. So one of the most significant uses of the tool, I think, is this ability to acquire and dispose of property. And certainly there's more information later in the slide deck, but I will touch on this here. When an agency is able to acquire property in perhaps a key location as part of revitalizing an area, the agency can certainly, it's pursuant to a competitive process, but to the extent there are desired types of development that we want to occur in a specific location, the agency in its RFP can provide some significant sideboards on we want to see responses to the RFP that include affordable housing, or that the AMI average is somewhere between 80 and 100%, or we want a mixed use project. We feel like this is a great location for a commercial project. Putting those types of sideboards in can lead to your desired development. And ultimately, when you dispose of the property to that particular developer, following a reuse appraisal, you cannot convey the property for less than the fair value for uses. That often will permit the agency to participate in the project by the property value alone. So not necessarily receiving fair market value of the property, but participating in the property by conveying the property for zero. And sometimes that is just a critical piece in order to get the desired development that you want in a certain location. So that is a tool in your toolbox. And you can invest and borrow money, and there is broad flexibility to work with other public entities in the statute. Any questions with that?
So Megan, if I understand that, we're fine to work with public entities, but what about private entities?
Yes, I mean, there is the ability to work with, let's just go ahead and jump down to slide 12. And that's project financing options. So how do we engage in our private developers? How do those come to be? So if you have a developer that is engaging in a project that is meeting the goals that have been set by both the agencies and the city for a large part, but there's a piece missing in that this project really is not going to go forward but for urban renewal. They really need this assistance to kind of get it over the finish line. what will often happen is there are some public infrastructure improvements that are just more costly than the developer originally anticipated. And so the ability to partner is oftentimes, and I think most frequently, these developer reimbursement agreements or owner participation agreements, where the developer, the owner, by agreement, will advance fund the cost of certain public infrastructure improvements. And then once that building is on the tax rolls and generating additional taxable revenue, then a portion of that revenue can be allocated and reimbursed back to the developer to pay for those eligible public infrastructure improvements. And then are all the terms and the requirements are all set forth in an agreement that dictates and identifies what is eligible, what the developer has to do to prove that those are public infrastructure improvements and those are the costs. And it's a process, but that is by far the most common method of helping with private development. Does that help, Commissioner?
Yes.
Okay. Lewiston has had some bonds that has issued in the past. There are a few other agencies that have also issued bonds. As you know, those types of financing, are fairly challenging. You really have to be able to show the revenue stream to support those types of financing. And so when you go into a new project area, oftentimes there's not any revenue funding for quite some time. And so by the time that you do have the ability and you have saved up enough funds or can show the revenue stream, you have an updated pro forma funding institution, and sometimes there's just not enough time left in your project area to make a financing the most reasonable, cost-effective option. But sometimes when there is, it is the best option, and you can advance significant infrastructure improvements early on. So it's another tool in your chest that you have, but I would say by and large, most projects are pay-as-you-go, where you save up the money and then do the project yourselves, or you partner with public and or private entities who can set up these developer reimbursement or owner participation agreements. And sometimes some agencies have established participation policies where there are policies in place that dictate with some specificity the types of projects that the agency will work with and to what extent. So for example, if you're in a community where affordable housing or workforce housing is playing, and you are working with a developer to encourage that type of development, the agency may be willing to reimburse, up to 80% of the eligible public infrastructure improvements for the life of the district. Or sometimes it's just a flat fee based on the project. Agency will participate up to an amount of $100,000 that's payable over a specific time period. You really can structure these types of agreements any way that you want. Participation policies can be great, but a policy is a policy. So if you have a policy, you have to follow it. And it's very unusual that every single project that crosses your threshold is going to be the same and would fit squarely within the four corners of a participation policy. So oftentimes when you have a participation policy, it doesn't work very well for each project, and so you have to go back and either amend the participation policy or you can just have a policy of taking every project on its own, case by case. So those are the most predominant ways that we partner with our private entities. Does that, any more questions about that? Slide 13. Just as you all are more than aware, the Idaho Code provisions related to open meeting laws and public records. Slide 13 is just basically these projects, when these agreements are entered into, they're always transparent, they're always on the agenda, they're always, decisions are made in open public meetings. And oftentimes the best way to do that is to have an agency resolution. I know Lewiston is really good about using resolutions. I do think that helps track agreements and just policies and other things that you adopt with a better tracking tool. And then I think before you engage in a project, there's got to be some type of an analysis that the project is economically feasible. So the developer's got to show up with some data, and we have to be able to run the numbers based on what they're telling us. Is their end desired, or is there end value? Is that an accurate statement? Can we work with the county to understand, or is the numbers that they're projecting, are those realistic? Let's look at what our applicable levy rate is and apply that to the value. Oftentimes when your developer partners come to talk to you about projects, they have some awareness about how the tool works, but they don't quite understand the timing of the budget levy setting process and when the agency actually gets the dollars in the door and when the value actually gets on the tax rolls. So really digging in deep and running those numbers and trying to give you as well as the developer a better sense as to when, if this project is successful, when will it be actually on the tax rolls and when will you actually get the first check in the door? Because oftentimes they think it's next week, right? And it could be quite far down the path.
Megan, can you be careful to point out the page we should be following you on as you move forward?
Absolutely. Sorry,
you.
that was just really page 13, just commenting on that. So moving to page 14. And I will probably walk through the next series of slides fairly quickly, but I just want to make sure that we all have a foundational knowledge about how the revenue allocation financing tool actually works. So when a revenue allocation area is formed, the property value is calculated on a parcel by parcel basis. And so for each parcel, there's a base value, and then as the values increase, there's an increment value. So when you have a proposed new project area coming online, there is something we call the 10% valuation. And the combined base assessment rolls of your existing district plus your proposed base of your new district can't exceed 10% of the current assessed taxable value for the institution. That's just one of those boxes that we have to check at formation. So as you know, as property values increase, that increase in value over the base is what is referred to as the increment value. And the taxes from increment value is often just referred to as the increment or the revenue allocation fund. So page 15. So as you know, the public entities have limitations on their budget and levy. And so that impacts both the levy rate as well as if the values are increasing and budgets are not increasing as quickly, sometimes the levy rates end up being lower. A taxing district has some ability to take new construction and annexation value to increase budget capacity up to its cap, which is now an 8% cap annually. But all of those factors go into the levy rates. And so, as you know, with the way that you budget, your budgets are adopted before levies are set and before values are set, which makes it extremely challenging. You're basically working off of a projection. And those are numbers that fluctuate. Values, levy rates always fluctuate in fees. So I know your staff does an excellent job of looking back as well as looking forward and trying to pinpoint those values and levy rates because you set your budgets annually. So the county is instrumental in that budget levy setting process, and they're the ones that certify those levy rates and determine what the levy rate is going to be for your taxing district. And as you know, the full levy rate is applied to the base value as well as the parcels outside of a revenue allocation area. And then a different levy rate is applied to the increment. And that is because based on statutory changes, not all levies generate revenue for an urban renewal project area. There are levies that are voter approved levies and bonds. Most school districts, levies and bonds do not generally come with an allocation area. So there's, when we really get into the weeds on how this works, there are a lot of nuances. And I do feel for the county and the county staff, because this is extremely challenging to track all of these changes, and especially as the statutes change year over year and calculations change, it is a lot of work. And so I think it is important that as we get data, that we just make sure that we're working really closely with the county to make sure that we're getting accurate numbers as we forecast moving forward. So obviously taxes from the base are allocated to the taxing district, taxes from the increment are allocated to the urban renewal agency. Urban renewal plans from this point forward really are 20-year plans. There are some that are grandfathered in that are 24. Many of those are we're finding ourselves in the period of wind up, and a lot of those are closing out. Page 16. So oftentimes there is some rhetoric that an urban renewal agency levies taxes. An urban renewal agency does not levy taxes. It receives an allocation of property taxes. And there is a distinction there. So you get the proceeds that you get. You do not have the ability to go back and get more money if you happen to be short. So you are limited by your revenue allocation proceeds. The dollars that you receive really should be spent within the boundaries of your revenue allocation area. And I think I've covered everything else. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Megan, I have a question on that third, where it talks about the funds received by an urban renewal agency for a given revenue allocation area must be spent in that revenue allocation area with limited exception. Can you give us one of the limited exceptions?
Sure. Sometimes, let's take a significant economic development project that the user is going to just use, say, 40 acres of land for its project. And it has significant infrastructure needs in order to get water and sewer in the public right-of-way around that area. Let's say the wastewater treatment facility is miles away. And this new user that's coming online is going to have significant impact to the wastewater system. But you also don't want to include or make a district that is that big. So I think when you build out your plan and you have your specific items that you intend to spend money on, I think that is one of those circumstances where, but for this project coming online, you would not need to make those types of improvements to the wastewater treatment facility. So that is an example where it makes sense to be able to use those funds to make those improvements. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so slide 17. Any more questions on just how the tool works?
Yeah, down on the bottom, towards the bottom of that, it says, for project areas established after 2008 and voter approval after 2008, the Urban Renewal Agency will not receive taxes generated by voter-approved levies such as general obligation bonds, school district plant facility levies, and supplemental levies. What does that mean?
That's a fair question. So in Idaho Code Section 2908, that identifies the list of levies that do generate revenue for a project area. And so there was a statutory change in 2007 that really became effective, I believe, in 2008, that stood for the proposition that voter levies would not generate, so a voter-approved levy that would be applied to the increment really should not be generating revenue for an urban renewal project area. So when you calculate what levies are generating revenue for an urban renewal revenue allocation area, there are certain levies that you take out of that formula. And actually, when you calculate the levy, you're not calculating the increment, or sometimes you are calculating it as the full taxable value, but those revenues that are generated do not flow to you.
Does that affect the school levies and that, under that?
Not negatively. I mean, they get what their budgeted and levy, and they'll calculate it differently, right? In terms of
Right.
if it's a flat amount versus levy, yeah. So it's just in the formula, and sometimes you take the total equalized value and establishing the levy rate, which I think you do with some of those school district levies. And in that case, I suppose that increased value could reduce the levy rate, if I'm saying that correctly, Commissioner. Does that sound right?
If you say so.
That's
That's what it sounds like.
But I think that the main takeaway is that there are certain levies that are out there that do not generate, and that's another one where I think a developer will come to the table and say, well, here's my pro forma in terms of my revenue generation, and they may have just gotten the tax rate for the tax code area, which isn't, I don't want to say the tax code area, but they could be looking at like the tax code area that's applicable to the base. And so that is going to be a higher levy rate, which arguably is going to inflate their numbers. So I think it's really important when you get pro formas, you probably just need to tease out and get into the weeds on the details of it and make sure they're using their proper assumptions, because not all levies generate revenue for any project area.
So as we as a committee discuss areas that we want to include, we need to be very clear on that, so we're not hurting the schools and their levies and that, right?
So that really is all handled at the commission level. So when you are doing your planning for going into a new project area, the analysis is, when you look at the L1, you can actually see which specific levies you can kind of cross off the list. And so when you do your forecasting, you'll just want to make sure that you're probably using a more conservative levy rate as you build out over the life of your district. And I don't want to say conservative. I mean, I think there's assumptions that you build into the formula, and I think that's just one of those that you need to look at, and that we are not including in our formula the state school district levy rates. The fact that you've inadvertently included them in your formula, I think is not going to have any impact on the schools, because the counties are just well aware that those don't generate revenue for revenue allocation areas. So just as a matter of law, those dollars flow where they're supposed to flow.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So page 17. This is just a snapshot of what I think are Laura's current 4 existing project areas. Is that correct? Is there a 5th one? Am I missing this? Is there 4?
Nope, this
I
is
think there's
it.
4.
That's it.
Okay. So I put here next to them just the termination dates, and your main one is termination date is 2029, so you will have some coming up, and it looks like your others are really more in their infancy stage and revenue generation timeline in the project area itself. So I did not do just, for purposes of this presentation today, I did not do a deep dive into your plans and really not speak with any type of specificity or giving a decision on anything that's in those plans, but really just wanted to highlight for you, Lewiston has had a history of having very successful revenue allocation areas, and go out for the full term, but, you know, to the extent you end up completing the project, they can always be closed down early as well. And I think as you forecast and project and as your plans mature, those are decisions that are kind of easier to make much further down the road.
Just a question internally here, Megan, is that an accurate expiration 2029 on East Main?
Yes.
It is correct. I
Yep.
thought it was later than that with the close down of the old district and the new district formed.
That would be downtown, maybe? Is that what you're thinking of? Because we just, downtown was new in 2021.
Oh, sure, East Main is,
Yeah, this is the one.
Excuse me.
Yep.
All right, jumping into the next section of the slide, we are on, let's see, page 19, operating in the public eye. So, as you are well aware, because you do this every day, you operate under the open meeting law requirements and the public records law. And it's just really critical that we are just mindful of that and sometimes, you know, consider even posting and providing additional time if you know you're going to have a long agenda. I mean, just meet your statutory requirements here at a minimum, because I think sometimes that's where some of the criticism comes up, is there's this feeling that business is not being conducted in the public eye, in the open. And I do think that sometimes there's a very unfair criticism, because I think I represent a lot of urban renewal agencies, and they're extremely aware of the open meeting law, the public records request, and work very, very hard to make sure that they are in compliance with those. So just a reminder, it's just something we have to pay attention to. On slide 20, it's the procurement rules and procedures. To the extent the agency is doing public infrastructure projects itself, just a reminder here, there's a number of statutory provisions that govern how we do public works construction, and just making sure that when we do that, that we are complying with the level of bidding requirements, and that we're meeting those specific procurement thresholds as we are set out in Idaho code. I guess stepping back a little bit, urban renewal agencies throughout the state have varying degrees of levels of staffing. So you have some agencies that have standalone employees and staff, such as Capital City Development Board and Capital City Development Corporation agencies. You have others that have private retained independent contractors as their agency administrators. Brent Tolman from Burley, Idaho is a consultant and acts as the agency executive director for a number of that area. And then probably the most common model is the pairing of city staff and relying on city staff to perform some of the administrative functions. So I think as we look at our projects when we're implementing our plans, and particularly if we are taking on these types of public works type projects, it oftentimes makes the most sense to have the city be the lead out on these projects, with the agency being the funding arm, as opposed to the agency taking lead. And the reason is that there just sometimes isn't enough staff, and the staff that really knows how to do this the best is actually housed in the city, because they do it all the time. So there are different ways to partner with public entity partners, and this is just one that I think as these projects come up, certainly you're more than capable of handling them in-house at the agency level, but sometimes it might make sense to work really closely with our city or other public entity partners. Does that make sense at all? And I think that's how you currently are doing it. Is that correct, Shannon?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay, slide 21. This slide is included really to show the administrative challenges that face urban renewal administrators. And there are many sections of Idaho code that have almost duplicative reporting requirements, use oftentimes many of the same terminology, and sometimes you're submitting the same information to different entities with different deadlines. And so your administrators are the ones that track all of these different deadlines and reporting requirements, and it is not easy. Some have penalties, some do not have penalties, and so I think it's really important that as we go through, and especially when perhaps members of the public and others talk about urban renewal, I do think it's important that, yes, we have these audit and annual report requirements, we have budgets, we have these local government registry requirements, we have the State Tax Commission reporting portal, and for post-2016 plans, we also have the amendments for CCC. So there is a lot of information out there and available to the public, and a lot of it is housed on the Lewiston Station website. So any questions about reporting obligations? Okay, slide 23. And we've covered some of this already, but as you know, the commissioner requirements are set forth in 50-2006. And the Board of Commissioners can have a board from 3 to 9 members that are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. The number of the board really is determined by the mayor with the advice of the city council. Sometimes there are instances where I know of situations where there has been perhaps a 7-member board, and for a community that just wasn't right-sized, and so the mayor and city council, after 2 terms had expired, had decided that they were going to adopt a resolution or make a finding that that board should actually be reduced down to 5. So there is some flexibility in the change there. Urban renewal, since 2011, you cannot create a new urban renewal agency without voter approval. And I believe there have been some attempts to jump through that voter approval process that have not been successful. But existing urban renewal agencies can establish new urban renewal project areas. And there are approximately 48 Idaho cities that do have urban renewal as a tool. We talked a little bit already about how these are staffed, and I cannot recall, do you have a city agency agreement with regard to staffing in Lewiston?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Some don't, some do, but that helps keep the lines pretty clear as to what hat you're wearing when. Next page, 24. So again, 50-2006 does not provide a lot of guidance and clarity as to who may serve as a commissioner. The only requirement is that the commissioner be a resident of the county. And the only other qualification is that the members of the local governing body can only represent less than a majority. I've already covered. Next step, next slide, 25. So for the next set of slides, at least 25 to 31, I will just treat as a group. And we'll just hit the high notes, and I certainly want to leave you with, to the extent there is the conflict issue that arises, it's always better to identify them early and always run it by your agency administrator and then make a decision as to whether or not you need to loop legal into the analysis. It is extremely challenging to deal with conflict of interest issues on the fly, as in when it's a meeting. I think when that happens, it's just always a best practice to perhaps recuse and abstain from discussion on that. And then there can be some additional work done on the back end to determine, if moving forward, there really is a conflict of interest. I think the trick to conflict of interest oftentimes is just even knowing or identifying if there is a conflict of interest. Most often, let's see, I'm on page slide 27 here. I think we have to start with the premise that urban renewal agency commissioners have a fiduciary. And I think there's general recognition that everyone who comes in, oftentimes wearing multiple. And so just when you're sitting as an agency commissioner, the duty is to the agency, and that really is supported by the language that's in 50/2006. There are a number of the conflict of interest statutes which you see on the earlier slide, but the predominant theory through that is, am I taking action that is going to result in some pain to either myself or members of my household? So do I have a personal interest in this contract? Is this contract the agency is considering, is it with the company that I work for? Am I an owner in that company? What type of process was used to select these consultants or independent contractors? Additionally, sometimes we have board members, because they're community-minded people, that have property ownership within our revenue allocation areas. And I think we have to look at, when we are funding a project, is this project just being done solely in front of my property? Am I really the main beneficiary of this project that is coming online? And so recognizing those types of interests sometimes are kind of hard to tease out, but then once they present themselves, I think we just need to be aware and make sure we're running those through the proper channels. I think you can attest that conflicts and ethics issues are extremely complex. They're extremely factually driven. So if a situation arises, again, seek the opinion of counsel in advance when you can, or if an issue arises at a meeting, refuse abstain, and an opinion can be obtained later. So the only other conflict of interest issue I want to hit on specifically is on page 29, slide 29. And the urban renewal law itself has its own conflict of interest prohibition, and it's set forth in Idaho Code 50-2017. And I think just for being an agency commissioner, it's pretty important probably to read and understand this statute. It has been in the law since its adoption, and I don't think there's been any changes since 1965. So it makes it kind of challenging to work with sometimes, especially since we have later adopted ethics and conflicts of interest statutes. But this is the one that's in the urban renewal law, so this is definitely one that we have to consider every time an issue comes up. The main takeaway here is this is really centered more on interest in a project area and or property acquisition. So in your role as an urban renewal agency commissioner, you really cannot acquire property in an existing revenue allocation area after you're sitting on the board. So that's just something we really monitor, and that is one of those where it could be considered misconduct in office, and really the only remedy for that is stepping off the board. Alternatively, there is an exception that's on the next slide, where if you have owned property prior to being appointed and sitting on the board, you really have to disclose those property ownership. And there is almost an inference that's made that if you are appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of city council, that there is an awareness that these property ownerships are known. But just as a matter of policy, as we're onboarding these communities, this is probably something that we should just put in our regular onboarding. Do you own property? How long have you owned it? Where is it located in the revenue allocation area? And then really just be hypersensitive tracking projects that occur in that area and making sure that we're not inadvertently making decisions that do have a pecuniary gain. So any questions about that?
Yes, Megan, this is Joanne again. What if, we have one of our projects is the East Orchard Sewer Project, and it expands throughout the orchards. If a property comes for sale and we are interested in purchasing that property, regardless of whether it's being served, whether it's on a leg of the sewer or not, we should not attempt to buy it because it's a conflict. Is that what you're saying? I can see where it'd be a conflict if it was going to be served sewer in the next year and we're buying it because it's going to go up in value, speculation. But let's say it's the house next door and you want to expand your house to make a little farmette.
Yeah, that's a perfect example and a case-by-case complex ethics issue that we just have to jump through. I do think there is a distinction. The statute really is trying to preclude land speculation and making investments that are going to increase. I think in a situation like you're talking about, where you're talking about food, that's where you live, there's likely some analysis that would provide that that's really not what the but I do think when you have the fishing coming up, that's a perfect example of something that needs to be looked at. Any more on conflicts of interest? Some probably sticky ones, and I just really encourage you. I think that half the game is just identifying that, and then the other half is just making sure we're providing good guidance as to what the next steps are. Okay, so slides 32 to 36, 37 address how urban renewal project areas are formed. And I know you have been through this process a number of times. So if I could just see from a show of hands, how many commissioners have been involved with the new plan approval process?
2.
Oh, 2. Okay. Well, then I'll take a little bit longer here just so we're all on the same page. So establishment of an urban renewal plan, which includes revenue allocation financing provisions, the steps are set forth in the statute. And the way I like to look at plan creation is there's 2 phases to it. The first phase is the eligibility phase, and the second phase is the urban renewal planning phase. So, step 1, the eligibility phase is identification of a geographic area. And then you have someone study that area, compare the findings on the ground with the statutory language that's memorialized in a report, and that ultimately makes a finding as to whether or not that area meets the statutory requirements. And oftentimes the word blight is used, but the statutory language is deteriorated or deteriorating area. And so, I think sometimes emerging best practice, those types of studies that are undertaken often are done by third-party independent consultants that will come in, they will take a look at what's on the ground, they will meet with city and agency staff, and they will make that specified report that either finds the geographic areas to be deteriorating or not. So that report is then presented to the agency board that considers it, and if accepted, that report is then kicked to the city council. And it's the city council consideration and approval of the findings of the report which really kicks off the urban renewal plan. So if the city council adopts a resolution making the determination that the area is eligible, then that really completes step 1. And then you are moving into step 2. Part of step 1, the city council directs the urban renewal agency to prepare an urban renewal plan. There are that what is included in an urban renewal plan is specifically set forth in 50-2905. And there are 8 elements that must be touched on in an urban renewal plan, and each of those elements must be dealt with specificity. As we work through an urban renewal plan, there's often 2 significant component parts. Well, I'll actually say 3 significant component parts. The first is the urban renewal plan narrative that describes in a narrative format how we anticipate using the tool. What are the projects going to be? What is a summary of the financial information in an urban renewal plan? And how are we going to engage? Are we going to have bonding? Are we going to partner with private developers? Now, how do we do that? Through reimbursement agreements? Are we going to acquire property? All of these types of things can be included in an urban renewal plan there. There's also the economic feasibility study. And what the economic feasibility study does is it looks at what's the wish list of the public infrastructure improvements in this district. How much is that going to cost? And really, what is the timing that those improvements may occur? And then the economic feasibility study looks at the revenue projections. What do we anticipate the levy rate is going to be over the life of the district? What are some things coming down the pike that we know are going to impact that levy rate? Are we going to have revenue allocation areas terminate during that time frame, which could result in a levy rate reduction? These are all things that are considered. And to the extent the anticipated revenue exceeds the projected project cost, then the project is feasible. That's a simplification of the process, but that's what an economic feasibility study does. And then the third main component part is you have to have a map and legal that identify your geographic area. At one point, and I think Lewiston did have a history of doing this, where there was a much broader urban renewal area and then smaller discrete revenue allocation areas. With the changes in statute that have occurred over time, it's just it's pretty much the way I think you've been handling it is that your urban renewal project area boundary, your eligibility study area boundary, and your revenue allocation area boundary are coterminous. So they're the same. So it just makes it a lot easier for determining where to be. The urban renewal plan itself, oftentimes there are, again, I would say this is an emerging best practice, but there are consultants out there that will do an independent third-party analysis of an economic feasibility study. And as part of that study is able to, meet with the critical stakeholders and really make those assumptions, identify what assumptions are being made in preparing that study, and I think help kind of put that plan together. So once you have your urban renewal planning document, that's when you really kickstart it and you run through your public approval process. So your first stop again is a meeting before the Urban Renewal Agency Board, and if approved, that plan is then formally transmitted to the city. The first stop pretty much at the city is going to be planning and zoning. Is the plan that you have developed in conformity with your city's comprehensive plan? And that finding is often made by planning and zoning via resolution together with a staff report that supports those findings that are made. The next step is a copy of the plan, the agency resolution, and the notice of publication, the publication notice for the city council public hearing. All of those are transmitted to the overlapping taxing districts at least 30 days in advance of the public hearing. Then you have a public hearing before the city council, and the public entity follows its typical ordinance adoption procedure. Sometimes ordinances are adopted the day of the public hearing. Sometimes they go their full reading. Sometimes some reviews of consolidation. Following consideration and approval of the urban renewal plan, there are a number of post-ordinance adoption transmittals that occur. I think when you look back at how the statutes have evolved and attempting to respond to this desire to include specificity in an urban renewal plan, plans now generally take a long time to establish. So if you are looking at a plan for downtown revitalization project, sometimes that can take over a year or more if you're looking at a broad geographic area, because you've got to have someone get in there and try and identify what the infrastructure needs are. That's really challenging in a downtown area. I think when we're talking about an economic development project, the timeline for creation is much, much shorter, because those entities going in know exactly what it is, what their infrastructure needs are going to be. They have much better data in terms of what their taxable value is going to be upon being on the tax rolls. So those, I think you can almost do as quickly as in 6 months if you needed to in order to meet those types of development timelines. So it really runs the gamut. So then, any questions about plan creation? Does that all make sense to everybody? How much longer do you guys want me to go here? Let's just jump to slide 41. And this can maybe be a helpful tool for you. This can be, it's a list of questions that you can ask when either a developer walks in the door, and how do we partner with a developer, or if a developer wants a new project area, and is standing up of a new plan in a revenue allocation area, is that something that we want? And so this is just, these questions are really help to focus in on just making sure we check some boxes before we jump in with the partnership. Okay, and then I will wrap this up and then I'll answer some questions here, but your sections 44, slides 44 through 57 are the recent statutory changes that have occurred primarily since 2016. I think that the high takeaways here are, in a post-July 1, 2016 plan, to the extent there is a city council ordinance amending a post-July 1, 2016 plan, the adoption of that city council ordinance could trigger a base reset unless one of the exceptions applies. And what that means is, if there is an amendment deemed to have occurred, that will reset your base to the current equalized assessed value, which will eliminate your revenue stream in that project area moving forward. With that in mind, it's really important, I think, when you look at moving forward on new project areas, that you really identify what it is that you want to accomplish. And sometimes in a downtown revitalization area, that may mean putting in the kitchen sink a little bit in terms of these are our priorities, and they are plentiful, but we have identified them. And we believe that these are feasible because we have support based on the studies that have been and third-party consultants or engineering or whoever it is that you can rely on to support those public infrastructure improvements. We want to make sure they're in the plan. I think when we talk about specificity in a plan amendment, the question kind of comes up as to, if you have a plan that does not talk about sewer at all, and you all of a sudden get into your plan and then you feel there's a need for a big sewer project, that type of infrastructure improvement was not identified at all. It wasn't contemplated in your planning goals. It wasn't contemplated in your plan. That is the type of project where you need to probably think, should I do a plan amendment? Or is this something where we have completed our existing plan, we should close down and then we need to overlay a new project. I mean, these are the types of analysis you need to have as you move forward in this post-2016 world. The other high point is the exceptions or events that are not considered a modification are technical or ministerial plan amendments. You can annex up to 10% of your existing revenue allocation area just one time, and as that area is a plan amendment, you can update your plan and your related financials. You can have a de-annexation where you can take property out of a revenue allocation area. And then there's a plan amendment to support the growth of an existing or commercial or industrial project. So that is one, say you have a big industrial user that comes on, and let's say you weren't considering a water project with that industrial user, but you need to make a plan amendment. That is something you're adding that project, it's probably not going to be a plan amendment. So just be mindful of that as you implement. And then
So Megan, question here. On that, if you go into an area like you talked about sewer, and you don't have that listed on your RAA, do you have to open that back up to public input if you're going to reset it?
yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, again, there are different rules in place for pre-16 and post-2016 plans. So I think first, we really have to look at what it is that we're looking at as our base document. But to the extent you do proceed with a plan amendment, the plan amendment does go through the process. A formal plan amendment is what I'm talking about. So for example, if you are going to add your 10%, your one-time 10% of area, you are going to have to run through that process of the eligibility study and the plan approval process for that additional 10% that you're adding. But there is, I mean, there's got to be some flexibility built into the tool. And I think we also have to be mindful of that. There's the statutes, there's the plan, and then there's the practical application of what we're doing. And so just like with any project that comes in the door, there has to be an analysis done. And it really is case by case. But the tool is not just I wouldn't say it's just there has to be some flexibility in the implementation. And then finally, I think on page 50 and 51, we just want to also be mindful when we talk about combining fees with other public dollars to build certain municipal buildings. And municipal buildings is a defined term, as well as multi-purpose sports stadium complex is a defined term. And so the way the statute is worded is that if the city and an agency want to partner together and say like a public safety building, you're only going to be able to fund 50%, then you're going to have to go out to the voters if you want to be able to fund the entire thing with those public funds. There are exceptions. One of them is if you're just doing a remodel and it's less than $1 million, then you're able to proceed. And $1 million is, in this construction age is not a very big remodel. And then additionally, below ground infrastructure is also permitted. So water, sewer, those types of amenities related to a municipal building or anything that falls within the definitions in that statute 502905A, those are excluded from the joint funding of an agency and a public entity. So again, when you are considering partnership with the city or the county or other public entity, you really need to make sure that we're not running afoul of what is defined as a municipal building or a sports stadium. And that can be really challenging if you're trying to partner together on a park. So for example, and there are going to be some permanent bleachers in that park. So that's just kind of some of the nuance that we have to with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sorry, I ran long.
It's a lot of information. Thank you for the presentation, though. We have so many new board members. Very helpful. Thanks for setting that up, Shannon.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, I think I sent an email about this, but I'll just remind you that many of the Idaho code references that are in this document are all on a page that's connected to the URA website, so you can easily just go on those links. I didn't pick up all of them, especially with the new legislative ones, but the general Idaho code that does pertain are all there for you, or if you see one that's not there, just let me know and I'll add it.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I know this is painful to do it from afar, and I appreciate all of you listening to me ramble. Thank you.
It worked out pretty good.
There's one question. Megan, there was one piece of legislation in the 2023 legislature that affected urban renewal, and I read the synopsis of it and didn't understand it. Is that something you'd give us a quick fill-in on?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's probably two pieces I can touch on here. So there was, it's stemming from a project that is ongoing, and as part of a data center was coming to CUNA and it was placed into a revenue allocation. And in earlier, 2020 or 2021, the state had decided that data centers were a type of project that it wanted to incent to come to Idaho. And so there are certain data center related component parts that are eligible for sales tax exemption. So the bill essentially stood for the proposition that if a data center is receiving the sales tax exemption, it cannot also be in a revenue allocation area. And so it's taking a project and it's reallocating it essentially to the base value. I think there's some significant challenges with the bill in the way that it's drafted, and I think also coming in and having retroactive application like that it may make it challenging to developers to come. The concern is obviously urban renewal agencies at the local level often partner with the state and that's often the way that we are able to plan some of these bigger projects. So I think we just want to be mindful of what we're doing. That bill did pass and now is law. And then the other one is the property tax relief bill that originally the governor vetoed and then was overridden. That's House Bill 292, and there are some trailer bills that are associated. But I just want to be clear that as part of the property tax relief and how the dollars flow, revenue allocation areas should be receiving its allocation of revenue. Just like all of the other, just like the taxing districts, revenue allocation areas can also be a piece of that sales tax reimbursement. So we'll just continue to watch that. But we oftentimes will watch those property tax related bills because they do have sometimes an unintended consequence with how dollars flow. So, does that help about the data center?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Megan. I think we're gonna
Yeah,
Thank you.
anything else?
Nope, I think we're gonna move on the agenda so we can get out of here today. But
All right.
Do appreciate your
apologize,
time.
sorry.
no, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Very worthwhile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the final thing on the agenda is the discussion of our East Main Revenue Allocation Area number 4 review.
Yeah, so this came up, I did put together a memo that after Megan's presentation, I thought of some other points to put in here, but we can just talk about those. So essentially, what we're talking about is Maine East Maine. The reason why we're talking about this one now is because, as you are aware, we made the final payment to the city for the water lines and stormwater lines under the US 12 21st Street intersection that ITD rebuilt in the last couple of years. So I put together just a real high level estimate of what this revenue allocation area will continue to do over the next few years, given that nothing has changed. So you can see here, and I'm just gonna make this a little bit bigger. I used a pretty conservative number, as you can see, of $350,000 for additional, for increment. And I based that on 2022's number of $346,000. And so essentially what we have is we have the rest of 2023, our balance at the end of March for this revenue allocation area, $394,000. We have some admin costs that come in. Admin's going to either be the city or it's going to be legal bills, you know, various things that aren't attributed to a specific RAA. And then the estimated rest of the increment for the rest of the year to get a total of $481,000. Then moving on through the years, and this RAA does terminate in 2029. So moving through the years, you'll see that other admin kind of reduces, and that's because I made the assumption that we will split the admin costs 4 ways instead of 3 ways starting with our next budget. And so that reduced down a little bit, just wanted to point that out. So we are looking at then 350,000 estimated increment. And so the roll, I just wanted to show a kind of a rolling where we would be given that $350,000 increment. And so if you look at that, you can see that, you know, 2026, 1.4 million, 2027, 1.8, 2028, 2.1. And again, the reason why I put in the memo 2 million to 2.5 is because that 350,000 is a very conservative number. And the reason why I brought it up on the spreadsheet is if you wanted to play around with it, you could. Like if you said, no, we think it's going to be 400,000, we could do that. So, so given that, we have a couple of projects that are still remaining in this plan. So without even doing an amendment, as Megan was just talking about, there is 2 other projects that were identified when this plan was adopted in 2017. That includes pedestrian improvements. And just so everybody knows, the map of Maine East Maine is right there to give you kind of a visual of what this is. It's a pretty good sized revenue allocation area. However, once you get towards the east, there's kind of empty parcels that don't have a lot on them. So pedestrian improvements, and what this was Laura talked about this on her final day here. You know, this is essentially being able to move from around the Hells Canyon Grand area towards the north, crossing into the big intersection, and then being able to cross into Locomotive Park, which happens to be ITD right-of-way, and accessing the levee trail system. So a couple of the points that I made with this one are that the plan identified that the city was applying for FLAP funds, Federal Lands Access Program funding at the time, was hoping to get a partner with that. FLAP did come into the city. We were awarded some funds on Snake River Avenue. There's a pedestrian crossing there and a switchback trail, but this project was not awarded, and it's gone through twice. And so FLAP is like, they're not really excited about awarding this project. And so then if the URA did want to pursue it, you would be looking at the full cost in 2017 was estimated 130,000. It's going to be way more than that today, just based on what we know from other developments.
Question for you.
Sure.
Is it based on the crossing of the main highway, the slowing down of traffic? Is that why they didn't award that part? Because if you start putting pedestrian across that highway, especially coming across the bridge there, you're really going to inhibit the traffic flow.
Yeah, I don't think it was so much crossing the highway. I mean, I think it was using the pedestrian accesses that are within the new intersection. It's more, FLAP is unique in an area like this because it is literally how do you access federal lands. In this case, that's the levee system. It's owned by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Typically, FLAP funds are not used in urban settings, and so they're somewhat unusual projects here, and I don't really know why they said, no, we're going to pass on that piece. Because it is somewhat similar to the one on Snake River Avenue. You're trying to get a certain amount of people to access the federal lands. I don't know of the feedback they gave on that one, but in the case, if you did compare it to Snake River, you're looking at a neighborhood.
Snake River or Levy? You mean?
Snake River Avenue.
Oh, the new
Yeah,
one.
from Prospect down. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's kind of capturing a college, capturing all of the residents, and it's getting them to the federal lands. In this case, you don't have as much of a population base, if you will, for this trail.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I know was the plan, I didn't really study it very much, but does the plan go underneath the bridge?
for this particular,
Right.
so it can.
Because to me, that would be a lot better to do that. On Snake River, I don't like that at all,
Mhm.
because it stopped traffic for 5 to 7 minutes while people fiddle fart around to try to get across the road.
Mhm.
And it does, especially at certain times, there's a long line of traffic.
Yeah.
And so it inhibits the movement of traffic. And I don't like those things when they do that, because, you got
Yeah.
one person on a bike, takes his time to get across, and then you got 30 cars on each side that's backed up.
Yeah, this is not an additional
Yeah.
pedestrian crossing. This would go from the existing intersection through Locomotive Park, or on the other side, I have seen bicycle trails
Right.
that did go under the bridge. So this would not be an additional crossing.
I know at the fitness center, there's a lot of people who want to run and get they don't have access down to
Yeah, so that would be a good
the
example of
green
that.
belt. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's viable, but I tell you, you start closing up traffic, stopping traffic for pedestrians across that road.
No, that's not the intent of this one. No.
And I would offer as a part of the city council, that the city is for everybody, not just traffic. And that means pedestrians, and that means people on bicycles. And the more people you get on that, the more you get out, and that's how they get there. There's currently no parking over there, not legal parking. So for people to access that park, for people to access the levee system, they have to be able to cross the street. And that's one of the great things, that's why it's added. It's an inconvenience for somebody in a car, but I don't really worry too much about that. So I'm all in favor of it, and I use it. As a bike rider, I use it. And a walker of a dog, I use it. And I'm appreciative that there's a place where people can walk safely. If you've ever been on Snake River, try to get across the street when there is traffic, it's dodgy at best, so.
Well, Don, I use Snake River Avenue all the time, every day. And I've never been held up for more than 1 minute with pedestrian accessing either up or down.
I access a lot too, but I've been up to 7 minutes waiting for people to get across there.
Well, it's good you're more patient than I am.
Well, I get kind of impatient, like if I was up there, I'd probably run over them.
Right.
But, speaking like Rick was saying, we have the levee parking all along there for people to access the Greenbelt and the levee if you're going to be up on that. And I think sometimes we have to take in consideration that we're getting more and more traffic in this town, and we need to accommodate that is moving, that it isn't stagnant and it's not building up. I don't want to, that's why I don't want to live in Boise or Coeur d'Alene, because it takes 10 minutes to get through a stoplight there. And while you're sitting there, you got, $4 and $5 gallon fuel that's burning up, plus all the smog and everything else that comes off of that. So I'm all for moving things out, but I'm also cognizant of people that are trying to recreate as well. And I think there's plenty of parking spots.
What about a caged overpass like the one from 5th onto the levee?
This one is not, it's not contemplating an additional pedestrian access. It is using the crosswalks at the intersection, and it's more paving the way, working with the Corps of Engineers and the railroad to create something beyond the intersection to the levee system. Because if you go there now and you're at Locomotive Park, for example, it's very difficult. You wouldn't be able to do it. So you might have to do something that would go over the railroad. I'm not sure. It's way more complicated than $130,000. I will tell
Where's
you
the
that.
access point? Like, where would it enter?
That would be contemplated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, something
Yeah.
had already been decided.
No, it hasn't been designed, but I do know that it is not recommending, like, let's say at the end of the bridge that, oh, let's go ahead and put a crossing there. That's not what this is.
Well, and then on the 2,100 feet of pipe,
Yeah, I'll get to that one. Yep, because I'll put up a map about that one.
Okay, are we finished talking about the pedestrian crossing?
I just have one structural question about that. Is this on the city's radar in terms of, is the city likely to participate in the expense and staffing for this project?
It's not high on their priority list.
So if the URA does it unilaterally on its own, then you don't have the staffing if you're not utilizing the city staffing as you often are in a partnership type of agreement. So you're probably going to need a strong engineering presence. So just a thought on that one.
So we've done the water and stormwater upgrades.
Yep.
Those are
Those
all.
are done.
They're done.
Yes, that is correct. Okay, so moving on to the second project, and I think Aaron has this up. Yes, he does. Okay, so the second one is the water line project that is contemplated in the plan. The plan does say up to 2,100 feet of the 12-inch ductile iron water main from Lapway Road, which is right here. And it would go, there is an existing water line, I just want to say that. This is an upgrade, and it would continue on to the city limits line, which is right here. As you can see, there are some development and some empty land here. You have railroad property, Coleman Oil. This parcel right here is owned by one property owner, and then the county owns these properties right here. This is where their city shop or their county shop is. There are areas in this existing pipe that are as little as 3 inches, and there is concerns from the fire department on fire flows. It does prevent further development. For example, this empty parcel could not essentially develop without upgrading that line. So some things to consider here. I did ask the City Public Works to do a more current estimate on it, and their current estimate is 1.8 million. The city, as you know, has experienced some water issues as of late and are not interested in, this is not a priority for them. That's something to consider. increment right now, like I showed you on the spreadsheet. You don't have the increment to do this project if you wanted to do it. You would have to either bond it out or wait till 2027. However, there are possibilities with private partnerships that could be explored with some of the landowners that are adjacent to this and could benefit from it.
You have all the easements in place for this, right?
The
Because of
line
existing
exists.
water lines.
Yes, the line exists, yeah.
So how much road and sidewalk are we gonna be tearing up
Well, you would be looking at,
in the road?
depending on how many feet you did,
Yeah.
you know, it goes to about right here, and then it
So
converts.
is it gonna be off of the sidewalk there, or,
Oh, it looks
on
like,
some of that looks like it could be off the sidewalk a little bit, along there,
it looks like it verges off the street about right here.
yeah.
Would you be taking out the old pipe or just putting in new pipe?
You don't pick up the old pipe,
You do or you don't?
don't.
Right.
Right.
So really, it isn't designed yet, so you don't know exactly where it would run.
That's correct.
But I'm assuming that the estimate, the 1.8, includes repaving. See, you still there?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm assuming that it's
It's a-
refilling and.
It's a fully
and-
funded project,
Yes,
yes.
okay. And repaving the street there, or at least the parts. So my thoughts on this is that if there's not a 50-50 cost share for putting in this property taxes, this water line, utilizing property taxes to put in a water line, I think there needs to be a 50-50 share. So maybe that's what we agreed with Brighton, that's what we've done with Maine. I think, and that's what we're doing with the sewer project. We need to either find a partner that's willing to do a 50-50 cost share, and that would be a public-private relationship with a developer agreement, I'm assuming. If we're gonna keep this open for that particular project, in my opinion. That's my thoughts.
Did you mean on both projects or just one of them?
I think in both projects, the overpass is gonna be, I'm not opposed to the overpass, or to the pedestrian right-of-way at all. But I do feel that it is probably, based on the information that's provided in Shannon's memo with the railroad being involved, it's gonna be a costly project to do. And I question whether or not we'd have to start with a feasibility study to see even whether or not it's gonna pay off. So, and that's the littler of the two projects. I think our decision that we're gonna have to make in the next couple of board meetings is whether or not we're gonna close this project or seek a partner to help us fund the water main project, or drop the water main project and just try to fund the pedestrian walkway, right?
Madam Chairman, the landowner right there by the county,
Mm-hmm.
you think he's a contractor?
Mm-hmm.
There's a possibility he could maybe be approached and
Yeah, if that's the direction the
What
board
kind of
wants to
work he
go,
does.
you could, we could explore reaching out to a couple of the property owners to see if this is something they are interested in pursuing with the URA, knowing that the city is not.
It's a $2 million project, so we'd be asking $1 million investment.
Keep in mind though, when you're soliciting partnerships, you can get cost share. You can have them build the property up to specification and then have it dedicated. But you can't contract with anyone without going through a public bidding process for something of a dollar amount of this size. So you can't, my guess is there's no way to finagle that, to contract with a contractor who owns property to have that water line put in there, or it's a bartering sort of deal. Does that make sense? Just
You would have to
flag
bid
it
on
as
it. You don't make it, like if it's a cost sharing agreement, that's separate than the bid of the project. Doesn't mean you can't bid on it, I don't think.
So I don't have any idea what his
Possible conflict of
ideas are
interest
there,
barrier
how he's gonna
to
develop
be
his product.
proving a responsible bid, but that's requiring a lot of steps in my brain.
So Joanne, just so we understand, we had 50/50 participation on the intersection project. And we, with the loss of, with not being awarded a grant, we do not have 50/50 on the pedestrian improvement or the water line upgrades on Mill Road.
Yeah, the grant had nothing to do with the water lines. The
No.
city just said it's not a priority for us, so we're not gonna cost share on that.
So the city is not interested in the 50/50 share.
Correct.
Okay.
So the direction I'm hearing is that we want to potentially ask the large landowner if they're interested in a 50/50 cost share on extending the water main. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I feel it'd be worth a try.
Okay.
Would this be the only landowner affected by adding the water line?
No.
Seems like you should approach all of them that would benefit and see if they're willing to contribute in some percentage and then evaluate. It might not be
Yeah.
50/50, but it might be something that you say, well, now that we've talked to all of them, this is what they might all be willing to pitch in. Do we want to consider it?
So who's impacted? It's like the county, you said right next to him, that's county
Mhm.
property.
Yes, and then up in the,
Right is Coleman Oil, is that
Correct.
Coleman Oil?
yep,
But it's not gonna impact them because it verts off right before Coleman?
no, it would.
Oh, okay.
It would.
they
So,
be able
for
to benefit
example,
from it.
my understanding is, this is before my time at community development, but my understanding is Coleman Oil wanted to do some upgrades in this area, but could not because of the lack of fire flows.
What about the railroad?
I just raised that concern is because you don't want someone coming back and saying, well, you only approached me, but it benefited these other 5 landowners, so you're asking me to pay for something that benefits a whole bunch of other people. I just think that's press that you want to avoid.
A question, would this have benefit for Idaho Forest Group or Fairwater Pavement?
I don't know.
So would it be reasonable to figure out who those landowners are, how many there are, and what that would look like?
Sounds like you need a
Anything can be done.
stakeholder meeting.
I mean, the city should be able to tell you who all is being serviced by this line.
But wouldn't that be the smart approach to see if, who would benefit from this? And they would be the potential ones to say, do you want to chip in $1 million?
I mean, certainly, anything can be done. Well, not everything, but there can be outreach. I mean, like I said, we can take a look at it. The city's gonna know who's serviced by this line.
Yeah. Or past the line who might in some way benefit.
Right.
I think I know what the answer would be if you went to Coleman Oil and Keniston Corporation and said, would you like to chip in $1 million?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing you could do is you could not take a stance on $1 million. Because like I showed you, you're gonna have, $2 million. But that's not for a while. So you could go into it as an informational gathering, see who's affected by it, see what interest there is there. There's no rule that says that all URA projects must be cost shared. It's something that you can, desire, but it's not the law. And so maybe we take a look at, we say, yes, we think this is a viable project to research further. And we take a look and see who the property owners are that are affected by this line or could be affected by this line, and we go from there. And then we see what they come back with. And if it's, we'd love for you to do this, but we're not gonna put any money into this, then the URA makes a decision that, okay, well, we still think it's a viable project. I mean, in this case, unlike other ones, the city isn't coming to you and saying, help us, right?
Most of them realize that they are putting money into it because they're paying the taxes.
Yes, this is property
They're
tax
taking-
money going to an enterprise
Right.
fund. There's more than one water utility in the
Right.
city. This would be funding a capital project for one water utility. If it did not have a cost share.
When you say one water utility, you mean a specific
City of
district?
Lewiston's water utility. City
Okay,
of
the
Lewiston's
entire
water.
city.
No, not the entire city.
Right.
City of Lewiston's water utility only serves downtown Lewiston and East Main.
Uh-huh.
The Orchards is served by a different water utility.
Mm-hmm.
So it's we're using, but everybody in the city pays property taxes, which is why I'm adamant that we use a 50-50 cost share, because that's what we've done in the Orchards for Brighton. We have a 50-50 cost share agreement between using property taxes for a capital project.
I can see where you're coming from.
Yes.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense.
But the other way to look at it is that does this, no matter who owns this water line, does this water line encourage growth and economic development if done?
That
So
would be the fire.
take the owner out of it.
That would be the fire flow piece of it, yes, I would agree, to a certain extent, but
That's
yes.
never going to get rid of the fairness calculation that people are going to ask, and they have a right to ask it.
Yes,
I don't think, I mean, there's people that ask that about URAs in general.
Yeah, but I'm talking about a specific fairness calculation. I think people are
Sure.
going to ask that. I think it's a fair question.
I think it's worth asking the landowners around that are served by that water line, whether or not they're interested in participating in a cost share agreement with the URA for this project.
Okay?
Now, I think the staff members, just looking at a little open meetings issue here, staff members can go approach these landowners individually. I think the board chair can go approach these landowners individually. If you start really discussing it in depth, I think you should have a regularly noticed informational or information gathering meeting. So just some
Do you need
thoughts
to
as
do that
you
one, right?
embark on that.
Case
Okay.
construction.
Okay, are we, any more discussion on this?
Western construction.
Western.
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 So drive out there and see where that's.
Any more discussion on the East Main plan? Okay,
Madam Chairman, can we discuss it at our next meeting? A little bit more in depth, after we get some more information?
Yeah, I'll come prepared with whatever I have to that point.
okay. So are we going to want to move that to the active agenda at the next meeting so that there can be a decision made, or we want another meeting to discuss it?
Depends on how long, depends on how long it takes to get the information we just discussed here.
Can we put it on the active agenda, and we can always table it if we don't feel like we have the information to make a decision on that? Okay, the next item on the agenda is the City of Lewiston's Comprehensive Plan Phase 1 Survey.
So my name is Katie Hall, like I said, I'm assistant planner, community development department. You may have heard, you may not have heard that City of Lewiston is embarking on a rewrite of their comprehensive plan. The last comprehensive plan was done in 1999. Comprehensive plans are designed to be a 20-year forward look of how the city is going to develop and use its lands and service its community. So we are in phase 1. We just kicked off last week. So our first part is a questionnaire. So I'm coming to all boards and commissions that are city involved and asking that those boards and commissions fill out the survey. So I have paper copies for you guys. There are typos. Please ignore those. I had already printed 50 copies when it was discovered there are typos. I don't want to waste them. So these are kind of just general questions. They are meant to be just filled out, you're thinkers. They are meant to be filled out individually, but not necessarily as a group think
What is
situation.
the timeline on this?
So-
Meaning, when do you need them?
Oh, so this survey will close at midnight on May 14th.
That's the same one.
Oh, I need to,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Is this the same as the online?
May 14th.
Yes, it's the same as the online one that you received a copy of, yes. So some people in this body who are members of our steering committee may have also already received a copy of this link or may have seen it at one of our steering committee meetings. But yes, the survey itself is open until May 14th. If you would like to fill it out and get it back to me today, totally doable. Otherwise, you can give it back to me later. And I will get your information entered into the system so that it can be recorded by the consultant and used in our phase 2 outreach. Any questions?
Can I give this to someone else and give it back to you? Because I've already filled it out online.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
More the better.
Yes, the more the better. Spread the word. It's also located online. You just go to the city website. It's underneath the Community Development Department. It's a side link with all of our other side links. And so it just says Comprehensive Plan and Vision List in 2024. And there will be there'll be press releases and social media starting towards the end of this week. And so you will be seeing it posted in more locations. And that's why.
Thank you.
And the deadline?
May 14th. Midnight at May 14th is when it'll stop being live.
Okay, we're now on to D, board comments. If anyone doesn't have anyone, I have one. I regret to say, now that we've done the entire agenda, that I am resigning from the URA. Today's my last meeting. Apologize for the inconvenience, but I have a personal issue I have to deal with.
I'm going to say I'm sad for both, that you're resigning and that you have a issue.
Well, thank you.
So what happened before I got here?
What happened before you got
Yeah,
here?
did anything happen at the beginning of the meeting?
No.
Okay, you just introduced yourself as a member at large, and so I was just like,
Oh, well, you know.
I was just making sure we ratify whatever we did in the next meeting.
No,
in case I missed
I
it.
introduced myself as a member at large to designate my difference between being an elected official.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Because that makes a difference for me. I enjoyed my time on the URA, been on the URA for 10 years this month, so it's not as long as Butch.
Which is a good thing.
No, but no, my mother's ill and she needs my assistance. It's not good.
Thank you for all your time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Done a
Joanne.
great job.
Right. Okay, so any staff comments?
Well, that's a big bummer for me. You know, I think it's going to be a great loss, especially to me personally, because I've been able to use Joanne as a place for great information for the URA. So we'll just all have to learn together and move forward, and you know, we have you in our hearts too. Thank you for everything you've done.
Yeah, we've got some, Dawn's been on the board a while, Butch's been on the board since it started. So, I think, so, and Katie's been involved with this in the background. Yeah, so I think we're well covered, but.
One question. Do you have anything that has to be signed between now and next meeting, number one?
The checks.
Because- Just checks?
I have minutes and other stuff that I
Okay.
sent tonight.
So, did you want to make your resignation effective at a certain date? And then, will we be okay until the next meeting where a new chair will presumably be nominated and appointed? As the director, will you be okay? Like, do you need it?
I don't think so. We can get these checks signed today and the minutes.
Probably go there. All right, so with that, are we finished with staff comments? I guess we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second, all in favor say aye.
Hi.
Aye.